Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am Stephanie Stombach, Child Nutrition Consultant with the Maine Department of Education Child Nutrition Program, and welcome to the Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program training for school year 2019. I hope the start of the school year is going well for everyone, and that you find the webinar is helpful. So during today's webinar, all attendees have been placed on mute. And just so everyone is aware, this webinar is being recorded so you can view it at any time. Feel free to submit a question in the question box on the control panel, and questions will be answered at the end of the webinar. And just a reminder, certificates of attendance will be emailed once the webinar has concluded. Now let's get started. So let's start with some updates on There were 154 schools that were awarded for school year 2019, and as a state, Maine received over $2 million in FFVP funding, which is similar to what we received last year. Part of this funding is set aside for DOE expenses, but the majority is given to the schools. The FFVP funding amounts have been finalized, and we allocated $50 per student multiplied by the enrollment for each school. Federal guidelines require us to award between $50 and $75 per student, and we always award at the low end to allow more schools to participate. And lastly, priority is given to schools with the highest % of free and reduced students. However, we also consider other factors such as number of late claims, how well funds are utilized, and if we have a concern with another child nutrition program. So those are other considerations that we go by. And as many of you are aware, the funding structure for FFVP has changed. This became effective in school year 2018, so last school year. And the funding structure changed so that it aligns with the federal fiscal year. And so it runs from October 1st through September 30th of the following year. So what does this look like for Maine schools? So here are some important notes about school year 2019 funding and beyond. So first, schools that participated last school year and have leftover funds from June have been rolled into September. And this process will occur each year, and all unused funds will automatically carry over into the next school year. As mentioned in the previous slide, school year 2019 funding will run from October 1 of 2018 through September 30th of 2019. So you will want to budget accordingly to have funds available for September 2019 for the following school year. So how do you know how much funding you have? Well, the funding amounts are listed in NEO. And in the past, we used to email this information to each school, but now we post the funding amount in our nutrition reports in NEO. To access the funding amount for your school, you will go to the dashboard, select nutrition reports, and under reimbursement, click on the FFVP usage report. Once you're in the report, you will select fiscal year 2019, your school district, and lastly, click View Report on the right-hand side of the screen. So here's what the usage report looks like. No login is required as it's public information. So you will locate the grant amount column, and there you will see that there's a July through September column and an October through June column, which shows the funding amount for each school. This report will also tell you the school's current balance as well as their usage, and this is based on the most recent claim for reimbursement that was processed. And this report also serves as a tool to help you keep track of your spending, which we will discuss later in the webinar. So every district that has one or more schools selected for FFVP must submit an FFVP addendum with the Department of Education. So this is an agreement between the district and state agency. And if you haven't already done so, you will need to upload the addendum as part of your annual participation packet in NEO. And the form is signed by the superintendent and uploaded under the supplemental attachments section. And only one addendum is needed per district. So now we're going to do a quick refresher of the regulations. So in order to participate, you must meet the following criteria. First is participate in the National School Lunch Program, which everyone does on this call. Second is be an elementary school or a school with a combination of grades K through 8. And as I mentioned earlier, priority is given to the highest percentage of students certified for free and reduced price benefits. Now here are some general FFVP program parameters, which many of you are familiar with if you've had the program for a number of years. So the FFVP must be provided during the school day and separate from the breakfast or lunch meal. Offered to all students free of charge, regardless of their eligibility status. And serve a minimum of 2 days per week, although it's recommended to serve more often so that funds are used in a timely manner and it's also in the best interest of the students. And some other reminders include that fruits may not have accompanying fruit dips, and this is because they're widely acceptable by themselves without any dip. Vegetables, on the other hand, can be served with a dip or dressing. However, they must be low-fat and portion controlled. And this can be helpful in getting students to try an unfamiliar food or a food that could be consumed easier, such as broccoli. And dips for vegetables are an allowable cost to the program, which we will discuss later when we talk about allowable costs in the FFVP. And lastly, cooked vegetables are allowed 1 day per week and must always include a nutrition education component. So speaking of nutrition education, a nutrition education component is required with cooked vegetables. In order to make the program most effective, nutrition education should be incorporated into the program in some way. And this can simply be done by supplying handouts with fun facts to teachers or during morning announcements. And some districts keep a binder of fact sheets at each school so they can easily be pulled when a fruit or vegetable is featured. And this is a way of keeping it simple but also effective. And you can also use free or low-cost resources from Team Nutrition. In order to apply for FFVP, all schools need to be enrolled as a Team Nutrition school. It was asked for on the application. So take advantage of the resources that are available through Team Nutrition, but also keeping in mind that funds can't be used for nutrition education or promotional materials. But many free or low-cost resources are available for you. So here's an example of a fun fact sheet on a vegetable. And we have samples available on our webpage that were developed by our office as well as from other states. So feel free to go on the website and check those out. And in Maine, we're lucky to have many great partners to help with nutrition education in schools. And so I've listed some here, but it's by far not an exhaustive list. And many of these partners are ones that were highlighted in your applications, and I'm sure many of them look familiar to you. And so using these partners takes the burden off of the teachers so they can come in and do the nutrition education piece for the school. And I know that many of them are happy to partner with schools and really enjoy doing nutrition education in schools. So it's important that the program be widely publicized and promoted in your school community. So although many schools have had the program for a number of years, you may have new families moving into the school that are unfamiliar with the program, and also new students are coming in every year. And so it's important to communicate this because the program is a benefit to the student and their family. So here are some ways to publicize the program and get the word out. The most common ways I've seen are through the menu and school websites, but here there are some other ways, such as robocalls to families, notifying people through school board meetings, press releases, school media centers such as TV screens in the lobby, and also email blasts to school staff. So these examples use a combination of technology, which is usually successful in reaching families, as well as notifying the school staff in the wider community. And just a reminder to make sure to give USDA credit by referring to it as the USDA Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program, because it is one of the USDA programs that we oversee. So here are some common review findings that we have seen during administrative reviews, and FFVP is part of the review process. So we're seeing that schools are serving less of your more exotic or unfamiliar foods, such as jicama and kumquats, and more of your typical familiar foods like apples, oranges, and bananas. Not that there's anything wrong with that, just one of the goals of the program is to not only increase consumption of fruits and vegetables, but to expose students to new and different foods that they wouldn't have the chance to experience. So just keep this in mind when planning what you're going to serve for FFVP, because that is the purpose of the program. And doing this also allows schools to spend more of their money in a timely manner. Another common finding we're seeing is funds not being utilized properly. And to just make sure that the person who is in charge of the program is well trained, as well as teachers if snack is being delivered in the classroom. Communication between the kitchen and classroom is very important, so everyone knows what their role is in the program. And so financial management is the most common finding we're seeing during reviews. And this is when schools aren't using their funds in a timely manner. So we'll talk about some ways to spend your allocation if you find you have money left over each year. As far as reporting requirements go, each year before February 1st, there is an FFVP site monitoring review form that has to be completed. And it does ask many of the same questions that we ask for during an administrative review. So it can prepare you for that as well. And so it's recommended to complete it at the same time as your other site monitoring reviews for breakfast and lunch, just to do them relatively at the same time. And after it's completed, it will be maintained at the school and you don't have to submit it to us. So it's filed for your own records that we would ask for during a review. So now let's talk about allowable costs. So in FFVP, costs are separated into two categories. We have operating and administrative costs. So your operational funds on the left side of the screen here includes fruits and vegetables, and the majority of your funds should be spent on fresh fruits and vegetables. Labor to prep, labor to serve. It also includes any supplies that you might need, such as cutting boards, serving trays or baskets, that sort of thing. And your administrative funds would include labor to order product, labor to prepare your claim, but it also includes large equipment purchases such as a cooler or a refrigerator. So say if there's a school that has limited cold storage, maybe it would be beneficial to purchase a cooler. And if that were the case, the cost would have to be prorated if you plan to use it, say, for example, also to store fruits and vegetables for lunch. You would have to prorate accordingly. And if it is a large equipment cost, you will also need permission from DOE to purchase it, and that's just to make sure that it's a reasonable cost, because it is a smaller program, and so we just want to make sure that the cost is reasonable and necessary, and so that the majority of funds are spent on food itself. And another important note about administrative funds is that they're limited to 10% of your total grant amount. And so this includes labor and large equipment costs, or I should say administrative labor and large equipment costs. So if an equipment cost is beyond 10% of the total school's allocation, the remaining cost would need to be covered by the school nutrition account. And if you have a question on whether a cost is allowable or not, feel free to contact me and we can discuss it. Because sometimes we have to talk through how to go about prorating the cost. So once you know if a cost is allowable or not, how do you go about claiming reimbursement for your costs? So you'll file an FFVP school detail each month under the specific categories that we just talked about. And you'll also want to keep all backup documentation on site to support the monthly claim for reimbursement and also during an administrative review. And paperwork must be kept for 3 years plus the current. And make sure claims are filed on time, as this is a component of the FFVP awards process. So it's another factor that we consider when awarding schools, just to make sure that reports are submitted on time, funds are being used properly, and so on. So here's an example of an FFVP school detail. So you'll report your operational costs, including food, labor, and other. And supplies would be an example of what you would put under an other operational cost. And your administrative costs include equipment, labor, and other. And as a note, only large equipment costs are put towards your administrative equipment. So these are larger, more expensive items such as coolers and food processors. If you were purchasing small wares, for example, those would be reported under operational other cost. So the last step when filing the FFVP school detail is to list the products purchased so that we know that only fresh product is being claimed for. We want to make sure only allowable products are being served. So this is another helpful report you can find in NEO. It's also under the nutrition reports. And so it's called the FFVP monthly claim report. It shows how much you claimed for operational, administrative, and your total expenses each month. So it's good practice to check this once a claim has been filed to make sure that everything went through properly, because in some instances we found that a director might think that they had filed their detail, but instead of submitting it, they had just saved it, and so it actually didn't get processed and they hadn't received reimbursement that month. So it's a good double check to make sure that your claim actually went through, or your FFVP detail went through. And so just an important note that it is updated based on the most recent claim that has been processed. So it's once we cut the check to the school department. So as mentioned earlier in the webinar, we found that there are many schools that are not spending their allocations. And so for school year 2018, approximately only 84% of funds had been spent statewide. So that's total funds that we received. So out of that, 2 million or so, only 84% of that was spent. And so any funds that are not used are returned to USDA. And so when we keep on sending funds back each year, we're sending the message to them that we don't need them. But in fact, there are many, many schools in the state that would benefit from using them. And so this could potentially lead to receiving less funds in the future, which we don't want to happen. So that's why we're looking more closely at financial management and monitoring how well funds are being used, because we want to keep on receiving this money, because it's definitely a benefit for the students. So as part of monitoring the funds, we conduct a midpoint review during the school year and also at the end of the year. And we're also looking at financial management as part of the awards process each year. So just something to keep in mind throughout the year when you're looking at your budget and seeing how well your funds are being used. So with all programs, it's important to have a budget and to track it and make changes as needed. And this will help ensure funds are spent in a timely manner. So what you see on the screen are a couple ways to budget for the program, and maybe you have another way of doing it that works well for you, but these are just a few examples. So the first is a weekly budget. So what you would do is take the total number of weeks of school and divide by your allocation, or what you receive for funding. The second way is to do a monthly budget, where you're going to take the total number of months for the year, and it typically ends up being 10, and then you're going to divide by your allocation. And also keep in mind when doing your budget to keep in mind to save some funds for the following September if you plan on serving that month as well. So it's really important to communicate with staff who are completing the food orders to avoid over or underspending. So give them a budget and make sure that they stick to it. And there are going to be months where the number of serving days will be lower, such as your months with school vacations and that sort of thing, holidays. But just make sure to balance it out during the other months. So here's the FFVP usage report again. Make sure to check it frequently to stay on track with spending. And as you can see, the grant amount is listed, the grant balance, and also the grant usage by a %. So by the time your January claim is filed, you should be at around 50%, probably a little less if you're saving money for September. And then towards the end of the year, you're probably going to be around 80 to 90% usage if you're saving some of your funds for September. So this is a great example of a district that used their FFVP funds very well. So if you find that you have funds remaining towards the end of the year, here are some tips to spend down your allocation. And again, keeping in mind that you're saving money for September so that you can operate in September of the following year. So to start off, if you have money left that you're going to use for September, you could hold some kickoff assemblies or tasting days at the beginning of the school year. Maybe during this time you're going to serve more less familiar items during the special events and kind of showcase maybe what you're going to give to the kids throughout the year. Conduct a mid-year review of spending, as I mentioned earlier. And at the midpoint, if you find you are underspending, evaluate why that is. So how many days per week are you currently serving? Can you increase the number of days? Do you need any equipment? Those are some questions to ask yourself. You can also increase the number of serving days if you need to. The plan that you submit in your application is just a plan. So if you decided you were going to serve 3 days per week and you decide you want to bump that up to 5, that's absolutely fine. The application is your plan, so you can certainly increase the number of days if you need to. You can charge labor to FFVP, either administrative or operational. And the other benefit of doing this is that labor is paid through FFVP and not the school nutrition account. We find that a lot of schools aren't taking advantage of this by allocating some of those labor hours to FFVP. So it could be a benefit to the program to claim labor under FFVP when it would otherwise just be part of the school nutrition account. So here are some more tips. So as we mentioned quite a bit, serving unfamiliar foods throughout the year, and it exposes the students to different foods, and usually these foods are typically a higher cost item, so it could help in spending your funds. Serve prepackaged fruits and vegetables to reduce prep time when needed, such as on Mondays and Fridays when staff might have limited time to prep and serve, and maybe you don't want to have any leftovers over the weekend that could go bad. So maybe doing a prepackaged item would be a good idea. And purchase local produce. So here's my shameless plug with local produce and FFVP. So with FFVP, you have greater flexibility in your budget. So that allows you to have the flexibility to purchase more local items. So it really can be a perfect match to start a farm-to-school program if you don't already have one. And it also supports farmers and growers in your community. Not to mention it educates the kids on where their food comes from. So all in all, it's a great way to start a farm-to-school program. And we happen to have Maine Harvest Lunch Week coming up this month. So I encourage everyone to serve some local produce in their FFVP during Harvest Lunch Week. And so that's September 17th through the 21st for those who aren't aware. As with all programs, you need resources to help you navigate through the regulations. Luckily, FFVP isn't too highly regulated compared to our other programs. But these are a few resources that are really handy and can help you understand all aspects of the program. So that includes the Child Nutrition website. This also has a list of schools that were awarded for school year 2019. The FFVP handbook is one of my favorites because it's broken down to all aspects of the program, and it really explains the nuts and bolts of the program really well and is very user-friendly. So I highly recommend checking that out. And also don't forget to check the NEO nutrition reports, because that can really help with tracking your funds, and also tracking the claims that you're filing. And as always, please use the Child Nutrition Office as a resource, because we want to make sure that you're successful and doing everything that you need to. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact our office. You can reach me directly. My phone number is up here on the screen, as well as my email. And so this concludes our webinar. So I'm going to check the chat box to see if we have any questions. Okay, let's see. So we do have one question. So is there a minimum serving size for fruits and veggies? So this is an excellent question, and I get it pretty often. So there is no minimum serving size like there is for school breakfast and school lunch. But I would say use your best judgment. If it's a school with, a primary school, maybe kindergarten through second grade, maybe a quarter of a cup would work better than, say, a larger portion. But if you have, 5th through 8th grade, maybe you want to do a half a cup to a 1 cup serving. So I would say gauge it based on the portion size you think the students would eat. So you can go a little less with the younger kids and do a little more with the older kids. So it comes down to a local choice as to what portion you want to provide. So the other question I got is, can you go back one slide? I think that's to read the resources. So, and just so everyone knows, this webinar is being recorded, so you can go back and go through the training at any point during the year if you need to. That's why we record them, so that you can have that option. So I have another question on catching the website for the book. So if you go to the Child Nutrition website, we have our own page for the Fresh Fruit and Vegetable program. So if you go on that web page, there's a direct link to the handbook. So I would access it that way. And I would download it, save it to your desktop. If you want to print it out, it's a bit lengthy. It's about 30 pages, but it's definitely a really handy resource to have, especially if you're new and maybe not as familiar with the program. I'll wait just a few more seconds to see if anyone else has questions. All right, so I'm sensing none. So be on the lookout for the webinar being posted on our website. And thank you all for your time today, and have a great day and rest of the school year.